Jingi walla blagami arako dugun. Jandamani nyali garama nyali nya. Nyali nya nyathan nyathan jen. Garama nyali jugun gunu. Wana jangma mala gunu. Gala jugun. Nyali nya jugun gunu. Bugube blagame.
G'day everyone and welcome to the Byron Bay Writers Festival, or at least an online version of it. My name is Benjamin Law and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Arakwal people, the traditional owners of the land on which Byron Bay now stands. I'm talking to you here from Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, which is what we call modern day Sydney. And First Nations Australians, like Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, have been sharing stories and knowledge here for tens of thousands of years, the oldest continuing civilization the planet has ever seen. So very grateful to elders past and present that we can still share stories and knowledge here on Aboriginal land. It's my great pleasure also to introduce our guest today. He's written plays, short stories, essays, and scripts, and he's best known as the author of 6 novels: Loaded, The Jesus Man, Dead Europe, The Slap, Barracuda, and now Damascus. And The Slap and Barracuda were both adapted into big celebrated television series. Hey, Christos Tsiolkas, welcome to the Byron Bay Writers Festival, or a version of it.
Ben, yeah, a version of it. It's an absolute delight. It's an absolute delight with you, sir, on this. And I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the land of the Kulin Nation, which is in Melbourne, where I live. And I too want to acknowledge the amazing storytelling tradition of that comes from this land, and pay my respects to nations that have been working so hard to make us understand what a precious country we live in.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
You.
Beautifully said, Christos. Hey, we're mainly talking to high school students today. I'm sure there's some teachers tuning in just to make sure that our conversation doesn't derail. But I want to take you back to when you were a high schooler. When you were a teenager, what were you reading? And did you know even at that stage that you wanted to be a writer?
My mother has a really, Ben, she has a really vivid memory of this. I don't recall it at all, but she says I was around 10 years old and we were waiting for a tram in inner city Melbourne where I grew up. And she said that I just kind of tugged her hand. That's the action she uses whenever she tells a story, and said in Greek, "Mama θέλω να γράψω," which was a very young boy's way of saying, "Mum, I want to write. I want to be a writer." And she always says her first reaction was pure terror.
Okay, so stop there. What was she terrified of exactly?
Look, I think for her. My parents came as migrants to this country and they never had the opportunity of education. They loved the fact that I was a reader. That was an opportunity denied to them. They grew up in rural Greece at a time when, particularly for women, you wouldn't get an education, and they didn't understand and have any knowledge of the art world, the literary world, and what they thought. But she'd heard, she loved movies. My mum introduced me basically to cinema. And all the movies she saw, artists worked really hard, died poor and unknown. And that's what she thought. That's what she thought my future would be.
But at the same time, obviously valued books, storytelling, and the arts. I wonder if, one of the things that we share in common, Christos, is that we're both the children of migrants, and half of all Australians are either migrants themselves or the children of migrants. And I don't know, was your family like mine in that, the arts or the idea of kids in arts was a bit scary, but at the same time, books are tied in with education, so there's a bit of a reverence there.
Oh, look, as I said, both my parents were so incredibly proud of the fact that my brother and I read. Like they encouraged that and the story I tell about it Ben, to illustrate what it meant to them was that every Thursday was payday, and my dad worked in a factory down the road from my school. And on Thursday he would get, and this is a long, long time ago, he would get his pay packet, and in those days there was no electronic banking. You would get it in your hand, a little yellow envelope with your money. And before he came home, he would stop at a newsagent cum bookshop on the high street, and he would pick up 2 books for me to read. And because he didn't read English, you were asking before what I was reading. He gave me Charles Dickens. Mm. I remember that. He gave me histories. He also gave me books that I shouldn't have been reading.
Which is always a good education.
And I would say that actually... there's an American writer, and he gave me a book of his, a man called Henry Miller, who wrote in the middle of the 20th century. Very provocative writing. He was banned in Australia for a long, long time, and then once his books were available here, they became quite common. And Dad gave me one of his books to read. I didn't understand it. I was too young, but it taught me a really important thing, that actually sometimes reading isn't just pleasure, it's work. And that sometimes the best joys from reading comes from doing the work. So I'm really thankful to my father for giving me that education.
It's a good early lesson, especially for writers, because I think sometimes people romanticize writing, and all writing is work. And for you as a writer, when you decided you wanted to be a writer, that this was something that you wanted to pursue professionally, what were your first steps and what were your first breaks?
Look, I actually, one of the things that I was really fortunate in doing was that I had joined at late high school, and this was the early 80s. And the big, if climate change now is the fear, that kind of one of the political questions that really is central to our age. At that time, because we were in the middle of the Cold War, it was nuclear warfare and the danger of annihilation from nuclear warfare. And I joined a group called People for Nuclear Disarmament. And that was great because at one point they did a newsletter and they said, would you like to do a film review? Because someone there noticed this young kid who obviously really loved films and loved books. And that newsletter has probably disappeared in time somewhere, but it's still one of my proudest moments when I got it in my hands and there was 300 words written by Christos. That feels like the first break. The other moment that's really important was, I'd been writing for a long time, so I started writing for, doing reviews, always writing, but never knew if I could call myself a writer. And I think that partly comes from the background, which is both the migrant background and also a working class background, where you don't kind of feel that it's a world that's permissible for you, right? I mean, I do think that that's kind of a thing that all of us from those backgrounds have to carry and have to really find the strength to negotiate and and where I was really fortunate, Ben, was I knew I wanted to write. I was working and I had this idea for a book in my head that turned out became my first novel. I had the character, but I heard his voice, this character called Ari. And my partner, Wayne, who is such a good man, really, he said, you're not happy. You want to write. Why don't you go part-time and see if there's a book in you? And I remember going, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And I think for anyone listening, any of the students, if you really want to write or you really want to make film or you really want to paint or you really want to pursue the artistic life, you have to realise that it's going to give you so much joy. It's going to give you so much insight. It is, I think, a choice that I'm so happy I've made, but it will require certain sacrifices. And Wayne, as my partner, who's not a writer, it meant that we may not necessarily live in the suburb we wanted to live in. We might not have the fancy car, but it would make me happy. And so I think I was really fortunate to have a partner who understood that.
Yeah.
That was really crucial.
You started out in publishing relatively young. I mean, it already sounds like you were writing and getting your name out there from a young age. But I look at
in the bottom drawer.
I mean, your first book, Loaded, came out in 1995. So that means that book is 25 years old now. And I'm wondering, what kind of a writer was 25-year-old Christos Tsiolkas compared to the writer you are now?
I was raw, Ben. And I think that that's something to not forget with the first book, is that you will never have that kind of rawness again. And I can go back to Loaded, and I'm not a writer who reads my stuff once it's done, but recently it's been adapted into a stage play. And so I have reread it, and I go, oh, why did I use that word so often, or why didn't I think, this section I should have rewritten it. But I'm also I can remember that young man, and he was angry, and he was impatient, and he wanted to say so much about the world. And I think if, as the older man, I would put a hand on his shoulder and say, "We'll be all right." Right? Because I didn't know if it was going to happen again. When you write your first book, you don't know if you've got it in you. You actually learn whether you have that ability in the actual writing of it. And so there's a pride that comes with accomplishing that is, yeah, it will never, ever again be the same thing. The difference over the 25 years now, my friend, is that I've become much more conscious of the craft. And the other thing I say when I talk to younger writers in particular, the metaphor I've used for a long time now is, I feel like writing is an apprenticeship. As in an apprenticeship, it's actually by doing the work that you learn. How do you use language? How do you use grammar? How do you use metaphor? All those things. But it's an apprenticeship that never ends. So I still read widely. I still have a vow, and this is, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but I do. One commitment I made to myself when I made that decision to see if I could write, if I had a book in me, was that I would, when I had a writing day, I would try and write at least 1,500 words. And that is still something 25 years on that I do.
To write 1,500 words a day sounds like a lot, but of course, when you're working as a full-time writer, you've got to keep up with that output. Have you got any advice for people when they're starting out with writing? Our world is so full of distraction nowadays. How do you keep on task? How do you manage your time to create the work you do?
Okay, so that little exercise of and you're right, some days I'm writing much more than 1,500 words a day. It's just that it's a way of exercising my imagination, my muscles in my head. It's a bit like doing a workout. And sometimes, Ben, you know what it's like. You do 1,501 words, and you look at it and you go, "I'm just going to delete all of it." I think the things that I do is to keep reading, and always by my bed I have a book of fiction, a book of poetry, and a book of non-fiction. And sometimes the inspiration will come from not reading fiction, even though I'm working on fiction. It'll be from reading a poem, or it'll come from reading history and starting to live in that world, trying to imagine what it was like to live in another time, in another place. The other thing that I think is really, for me, two activities that have been crucial. If I find that I'm stuck, I'll go for a long walk, or I'll go for a swim. And I know you're a swimmer. And I find that mental space of the pool or the sea or the park when I walk, it's really good when I sit back at the desk. And in terms of social media, I know that it's so much for, for the students who are listening to this. This is part of your life. I understand that, but it's so easy to go into that descent lower and lower, lower into social media. So I'm quite tough. I'm doing this at my home. I've got Wi-Fi clearly, but in the studio that I use, I don't have the internet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've got my phone. So if I do need to Google something, it's there. I'm not some kind of Puritan, but it is a distraction. And I think that like any distraction, it pulls you away from the work.
Yeah, I've got to be disciplined with myself as well. I'm from I'm the older end of millennial, but I've installed a program called Freedom, which is very Orwellian because it blocks your freedom to access the internet for certain periods. But you've got to do that. You get too distracted too easily. But Christos, now I want to bring you to the fact that your latest novel, Damascus, is such a departure from your previous works in a lot of ways, especially subject matter. It is about the events surrounding the birth and the establishment of the Christian church. And at the same time, I also wonder, now that you look back on all of your work, especially your novels, do you think there's any kind of bonding theme there in your back catalogue? Are there sort of still central questions that you're trying to interrogate in all the writing that you do?
I think, Ben, that there are, to be a writer, what I'm searching for when I read someone I've never read before is a voice that I've never heard of before. I've never heard before. Even if I know the story, I've heard this, or I've heard the story be told in another way. It's something about the way that writer, the way she uses language or words, or that I'm responding to. And I think every writer that I love has obsessions that they keep returning to again and again. And even though Damascus is set 2,000 years ago, I think what connects it to my other work is a really central question. When I wrote a novel called Barracuda, that was about a young man who wanted to be a swimmer. I had a card on top of my desk, and it just simply said, "This is a novel, a book about someone who wants to know what it is to be a good person in the world." And I think the nature of what is good, how do we make those choices, is a constant theme in my novels and in my storytelling. I think the other thing is faith, and that's why I've gone back to the roots of Christianity. Faith and doubt. And, I lost my faith in God when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, because I couldn't reconcile being gay with being a Christian. The Christianity I learned then was one that didn't make that possible. I don't think that's true anymore, but I lost my faith, and I could see what faith could do that was really destructive. And I also found that as a political person, I think faith is really important. We have to have our ethics and our beliefs, but we also need doubt. And I would say that that's one of the things that I think is really what reading, as much as writing, like reading has given me, is and I think this is quite a gift, is that ability to ask questions, and most importantly of yourself. Otherwise you become fixed, you become rigid. And the third theme, and I think this has again to do with migration, is the bonds of family and the obligations to family. Because I'm here today talking to all of you because of the sacrifices my parents did in coming to a country on the other side of the earth where they didn't speak the language, where they had no one, in order to give their children a life that was never possible for them. That obligation, which felt so heavy when I was a young man, I'm really proud to own now. And I think that will always be a theme in my storytelling, because it's part of what's made me who I am.
Yeah. Hey, Christos, last couple of questions before we wrap up. I'm wondering, you've been doing this since you were 25 years old. That was when your first book came out, and you're still writing. When was the last time a reader reacted to one of your books or told your books what you know, told you what your books meant to them, that kind of reminded you of the importance of writing, of putting stories out there?
I had this wonderful moment that will be unforgettable. It feels like another world ago now, Ben, because of COVID. But it was only earlier this year at a writers' festival in Adelaide, and a woman came up who is around my age, and she was talking about what my books meant to her, which was lovely. You know, it's lovely to hear. Of course it is. But she also said, I want to introduce you to my granddaughter. And her granddaughter was in her late teens. And she said to me how much Loaded meant to her, my first book, in terms of her reading it as someone who's not from an Anglo-Saxon background, Anglo-Celtic background, what it meant for her as a woman coming out as lesbian. And that was an enormous gift, that it was, that novel could speak across those generations. I will be forever grateful for that.
Oh, that's really beautiful.
It is really, yeah, I'm very lucky that I had that moment.
Hey, finally, Christos, I've got to say, personally, congratulations on winning what I think might be the richest literary prize in the country for fiction with the Victorians Premier's Literary Awards for Damascus.
Thank you.
What have you done with the money?
Absolutely. In COVID, not a lot at all. I mean that quite sincerely. Like, what happened was Wayne and I, we were going to celebrate, or we did celebrate it, our 35th anniversary, and we were in the UK, and we were going to do a driving tour, and then within a week, the world went shut down, and we knew we had to get home, and so we found a ticket and we got back home, and we feel really lucky that we've got a lovely home and that we could get back, and we could get back in time. So that money is still there to be spent.
Let's hope that self-isolation doesn't last too much longer then, so at least you can go out for a nice meal. Hey, finally, Christos, you've been scattering advice to your former self, to potential writers or aspiring writers throughout this conversation. But this is your final opportunity, I guess, especially to people still at school who are teenagers who want to be writers. What's your final parting advice that you'd like to give them?
I said before that being a writer is an apprenticeship that never ends. And the way you learn what that is, what writing is through reading. So my advice is, do not stop reading, and read widely. And do sometimes read things that are difficult, because they'll hone your muscles as a writer. And there is another piece of advice that I've only more recently have understood as being really important to what I do as a writer, Ben. And I think maybe you'll understand this as well, that for those of you who are listening, who do come from backgrounds where English is not the only language you have, that's an amazing opportunity and gift, because the fact that I grew up speaking both Greek and English means that I write in a slightly different way. And I've got this other understanding of how language works from the Greek language, and then studying a couple of other languages. So that would be another piece of advice I would like to offer, is if you do have another language in your background, don't run away from it. It's going to be really important to you as a writer. And if you don't, and I know a lot of people don't, think about studying another language. I think it gives you a greater understanding of how language works. So that would be my advice.
That's beautiful. Christos Tsiolkas, thank you so much.
You are such a good man. And I'm so glad you are in this world.
Thank you, Christos. I feel very much the same of you. I mean, when you're talking about that person who read Loaded and it meant so much to them coming out, I was also that teenager. I'm not sure if I've ever told you that, but I read Loaded as a teenager, and that was one of the first books that spoke to me and my sexual identity. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Christos.
We'll speak soon.
Yeah.